Hello.
Hey, Tony, it's Bonang.
Yes, Bonang. I was talking to my business associate who was singing your praises, Dirk Ackerman. So,
he's a good friend of mine for many years.
yeah, we got a business together. He's a good chap. He was telling me what a good chap you were when you were running Avis, I think it was, he said.
Otis Elevators.
Otis, well, something at the airport, when he was at the airport, yes.
Yes, absolutely. I was running Otis Elevators, and of course, the airport had many of our lifts, yes. But also some travelators. That's absolutely correct.
Well, they worked when you were there. I'm afraid I was at Durban airport the other day, and most of the things weren't working at all. So,
which is a great feat.
Tony, you needed the exercise.
Well, I do need the exercise, absolutely, but still.
Hey, Bonang, how's it? How you doing?
My dear brother, I'm feeling absolutely good. I'm a bit overdressed. If I knew that you'll be looking this dashing in black, I would have done the same.
I thank you. I'm in Cape Town where the weather was lovely today. I escaped the Johannesburg rain.
That sounds wonderful, my brother. So I see we still have another 5 minutes or so. So maybe I can get myself a cup of tea.
A cup of tea would be good. What are we going to be doing? Because Dina Diamond has joined us. And as often happens, we've got about 500 people busy watching us already. And until we start at 8 o'clock, we always have a pre-chat. And tonight we wanted to talk about a few things. We wanted to talk about the Oscar nominations. And Dina, you were telling me that in the Brit Awards, they've dropped the gender categories. There's no longer Best Actor and Best Actress.
Maybe to start by saying good evening, Dina. Good evening.
Good evening, Bonang. Good evening, Tony. Lovely to be with you this evening. Hello.
I'm so excited. This is Tony's first time on, but Bonang, I think this is your third. You've been one of our most popular guests ever over the last 2 years. And I'll ask the question now, which will be asked later, because every time we come on, everyone asks the exact same question. When are you going to be our next president?
I'm already president of Business Unity South Africa. And that's
not
all
enough,
I want. Never enough. Of the country. let me get myself some tea. Yeah, let me get myself some tea, but I can still hear you guys.
Okay.
So I'll get tea and bring it quickly.
You didn't ask me the same question, Howard. I'm really disappointed.
But if you want Tony,
I tried a few times. I didn't make it. So there you are. That's your answer. I was on offer to the voters in 3 general elections. Just, sorry, before we get going on the chat, how, from 8 o'clock, when is it going to end, Howard?
So we do about 90 minutes, Tony, and it's very much audience participation. So you'll see we'll get lots and lots of questions from the audience, and we try and make it as interactive as possible. So Benji, who's just joined us on the screen as well, will be looking at all the questions coming in on Facebook and YouTube and Zoom, and he'll help to introduce all of those into the conversation. And we try to do as very few speeches as possible and just much more interaction. Sure.
Okay.
And don't worry, it's quite likely by the end of it, you can also be nominated for president. So that's a great thing.
No, I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt anyway. So that some others have to do that now.
So Tony, people will want to know, what have you done? You left politics, you landed up in Argentina as one of our most vocal and interesting ambassadors. You came back and wrote an amazing book about your experiences there.
I've written 5 books.
And your most recent book was just published. Tell us a little about that book.
Future Tense. Well, that really was a look at South Africa over the last decade, where it's come from, where it's going, and why we landed up where we are in, the state we're in, to paraphrase tonight's title. And of course, the problem of writing a book about current affairs is that the affairs change, but the currents which compel the affairs have basically not altered, and more's the pity here. So everything I wrote last year, except you can change some of the figures and the facts, has unfortunately remained course. And that is that, at the end of the book, I had 9 signposts into the future. And unfortunately, 6 of them, are very alarming. 3 are quite good. And I haven't seen any reason. In fact, some we could say that the even more negatives since that book was published, which was last April, and now 10 months later, because obviously I think the situation's been aggravated and there are now new issues and crises that have arisen. And I'm afraid the same chap in charge, who's going to give his spiel tomorrow, our president, is baked into his share price, is a reluctance to actually grasp the nettle and make some decisive moves and action steps which could change the situation we're in and the direction we're going in.
Well, I don't know if you saw, but Magda just joined us yesterday, tweeted out asking her followers for advice of what she could practically do and suggesting out. Magda, you got one hell of a response. There were a lot of answers to your question.
I did. You know what? Maybe I should just bring my iPad here so I can read out some of the responses if you want.
I have no doubt we'll have lots and lots of people coming in on the chat with suggestions and asking questions. Yeah. But more importantly, 25 years of marriage. Was it yesterday?
Well, it actually wasn't. And I kind of, as my husband said, I kind of jumped the gun. It's on the 16th of March. But, you know, there is this, for the last 5 years. So there were two things. You know, one is I've written a book, which is getting released in May.
Okay.
And the publishers, you know, Penguin is pushing me for photograph. All royalties are going to charity, just, you know. You know, Penguin is pushing me for photographs and I was pushing back. And eventually I kind of, you know, I decided to give him the photographs. So I looked at the, you know, marriage album. So that was one. And the other thing is, you know, there has been this rumor in the financial services industry market for the last 5 years that I'm divorced or getting divorced. So and in particular this weekend, I got a blast of it again. So I was sufficiently annoyed to go. I'm not waiting for the 16th of March. Yeah.
Okay.
You know what the thing is, Magda, the problem is that they're not used to a woman having it all, having a great marriage, having a career, having a brain, having capabilities. So people don't like to believe that you can do it all.
But
Magda,
you know.
Magda, while I'm talking to you, just before we get going, I am reading a book at the moment you've got to read.
Okay.
Because you came from Poland.
I had a glass of wine, so keep talking.
You came from Poland when it was under communist government.
Yeah.
I'm reading an extraordinary book. The woman's actually, she's a bit of a lefty, interestingly enough, but she's a lecturer at the London School of Economics, and she's Albanian. And the book is, her name is Leah Ippy, and the book is called Free. And it's what it was like to grow up in Albania in the 1980s and 1990s, which was then the most, it was, you know, that they were on their own. They had no relationship with the West, and they broken with the Soviet Union because they deviated, and China. They fought with everyone. Yeah. And it was this hermit country, you know, in the Balkans. It's the most, you would absolutely identify with it. It's so well written. It's fantastic.
Okay, I'm not sure mine is that well written, but you know what struck me while writing it. I went back to Poland because, you know, I don't have much connection really. So I went back to Poland to kind of look, because look, it's kind of, it's not a dry book. It's not a book about finance. It's not, you know, it's kind of a mixture of stuff, my life, experiences that you wouldn't believe if you tried, because you really couldn't make this shit up.
Did you arrive in South Africa at the time of the Gdansk shipyard uprising? Is that the time you arrived?
Yeah, after. So the Gdansk, yeah, after.
With Lech Walesa and...
I actually met him when I went to Poland in August.
Oh, is he still alive?
He's only 70 something.
Okay.
Well, he looked old then, but he had a very tough life.
No, he was, you know, he was slightly opportunistic because he was dismissed from the shipyard for trade union activism a couple of years before the actual Gdańsk strike started. And then he was walking past when he saw the 17,000 workers striking, and he jumped over the fence, and he had nothing to lose. So he took over. You know,
if you think, Magda, of the end of the Cold War, the end of that whole bloc, that Eastern Bloc regimes, there were two poles. He obviously was one of the, you know, the leading figures in the world at the time, and the other was the Pope, John Paul II, and they both were Polish. It's extraordinary when you, or maybe it isn't extraordinary. It just struck me as.
Yeah. So, Tony, what was interesting about looking at, the history of communism, history of apartheid regime, and, again, I kind of, I like meeting interesting people. So, I had lunch with the clerk just before he got cancer. And I, chatted to him about the politics of apartheid and then ANC. And frankly, these regimes are exactly the same. I mean, it's terrible to compare apartheid to ANC because, one is a liberation movement, one was an oppressive movement, but strip away the rights to vote. You actually have these monopolistic governments which, have no accountability to citizens. Because, I kind of look at South Africa and I go, do we really have democracy? You've got no freedom of movement because you're scared of being attacked. You've got one party in charge, making all the rules of the game. So where is the freedom that, we've got no electricity?
I think, guys, you're having the discussion that we're going to be having after 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
So,
Militsi and Becky made the comparison explicit in that article on Monday, which pretty much is about the two nationalisms.
Yeah.
I don't want to preempt our discussion because people are still joining us, but I do want Bonang to give Magda some advice because, Bonang, you also published your latest book this year. So everyone on this panel is an esteemed author. What number book was that?
Not everyone.
Yeah, so let me start first by saying good evening to a good young friend of mine, Magda. Welcome, my darling.
Hi.
And Benji.
Oh, no, look, so nice to see you over Zoom, hopefully in person soon, because I'm tired of the pandemic.
I can imagine. So two things, just two sentences about the book. My first one was on Wednesday, the 21st of November, 2018, and it made it on the top 10 bestseller list. The title is Lift As You Rise. The second one, and it took me 8 years to write. The second one took me 2 years because I was in lockdown. Today is day number 684 of national lockdown. So it was launched on Tuesday, the 30th of November. After 2 weeks, it made it on the top 10 bestseller list. The title is Behold the Title.
Okay.
Both of them are available at Exclusive Books. So I've been very blessed that you people here on the call have bought this book. For that, I am touched, humbled, and honored.
Give us the title again.
Behold the Title.
The title.
So that's where your book's going to be. And then, Magda, where's your book going to be available?
Well, according to Penguin everywhere, but, look, if you know my personality, I'm kind of completely irreverent and hopefully there are moments of being funny. So Penguin is going to promote it everywhere and they're making a donation to charity because they feel so bad about the fact that I've donated, everything.
Good, let them pay. I want to tell you, besides for Bonang and Tony's books, which are great reads, my other book of the year comes that I think everyone should read, Tony, comes because of your friend Bill Browder, who was on our webinar in November last year. And his book, Red Notice, of course, is unbelievable. But he recommended a book called Red Roulette about the story of corruption in China. And if you haven't read that, it is an absolute eye-opening, brilliant book that I think is compulsory reading for everyone.
Oh, I'll make a note of that. Thank you.
Yeah. So, given that you're advertising this and, the Jewish banner, so what you need to know is that I'm half Jewish. And
Nobody's
perfect, Magda.
Yes, I know. No, I'm perfect. What do you mean?
So, Magda, explain to us, tell us your ancestry.
So the ancestry is, my father is Jewish. The whole family died in the Holocaust in various concentration camps, except for his parents who hid in Russia. So my grandfather was in a labor camp, hiding the fact that he was Jewish medical doctor. The Germans used him. My grandmother, look, there's a long story to it. Not all of it is in the book, of how she survived with my father. Because, some of it is just too personal, but she survived kind of living outside the camp. Then the German doctor who supervised my grandfather said to him, we're burning the camp down tomorrow and we're killing everybody. So my grandmother, who was a woman of great esteem, smuggled him out of the camp dressed as a woman. And, this is basically then, with there's a long story to it, but, I'll give you some statistics, which, there's a great museum that just opened in Poland called the Poland Museum, which is really worth visiting because it's, the history of Jews and Poles in Poland going back to the 12th century. And not all of it is defined by the last 100 years, which have been terrible. But statistics, 3.3 million Jews lived in Poland before World War II. 300,000 survived World War II. After World War II, there were so many pogroms against the Jews that by 1968, there were 45,000. And today there are 7,500. And it's the most anti-Semitic country you have ever encountered. So put it this way, my book isn't getting published in Poland. But that's,
Magda, will you, when your book is published, will you come back and let's actually talk about your life and your history and talk about the book? I think it's an amazing, fantastic topic.
With pleasure. I mean, I really had to dig into my ancestry and into the details because even I knew the incidents that affected, my grandparents in Poland, but I never really delved into the horror show that unfolded after World War II. So, World War II was a horror show, but the horror show that unfolded after World War II, which is what Poles did to Jews after World War II, is another horror show worthy of its own, telling.
So Magda, that's a date. Number one, you have to come for Shabbos dinner because we have to reclaim you as part of the tribe. And
you don't have to. I know how to cook kosher. My first boyfriend was Jewish.
How is a good cook? He'll look after you.
Don't talk about your first boyfriend when you just tell us everyone thinks you're getting divorced. So better 25 years with your husband, happily with your husband.
Happily.
So, Dina, the time has just gone 8 o'clock. We never managed to discuss the fact that on the Oscars, we have some interesting nominations. Steven Spielberg seems to have taken a big chunk of the nominations, and we never discussed that the Brit Awards have done away with their gender-specific categories of Best Actor and Actress. There's now only one.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much going on in the world. I mean, and we've got such an esteemed panel tonight. So I think that panel is superseded all of our different categories. So yes, so the world has changed, gender neutrality on the Brit Awards. As I said, I don't necessarily agree with it because 10 of the 15 awards went to women. Adele swept the carpet, shall we say, with all the awards. And I actually don't think it's fair to men. And I mean, even when you look at the fight for women, for equality and for gender, the pay gap and all of that, you go and then now you say gender is actually not important. And all of this came down to Sam Smith, who actually is a they, by the way, and couldn't enter the categories last year. So that's where the whole sort of hoo-ha came, that he wasn't entered, or they weren't entered in either the male or the female categories. I just feel that in itself is discrimination to the men and to the women. So I think it is. My personal opinion.
Discrimination at the moment. You can't open a newspaper without.
Exactly.
Well, the time has just gone 8 p.m. and a huge welcome to everyone around the world who's joined us this evening. We're expecting a massive audience. Literally thousands of people have registered for tonight's webinar, and we're broadcasting tonight on Zoom, on YouTube and Facebook. And as always, we want to remind you that, of course, this is now number 131 webinar that we brought to you from the South African Jewish Report since lockdown began. And don't forget, the latest edition of the Jewish Report is in fact out and available. You can go and either pick up your copy at Spar or Discam or Checkers, Pick and Pay, your local kosher shop, your restaurant, your school, your shul. This is the latest edition of the Jewish Report. It's out there. And if you can't get hold of a copy of the latest edition of the Jewish Report, don't forget that you can go to www.sajr.co.za and get your latest edition there as well. But I also want to tell you about our next webinar, which is going to be on the 20th. And Dina, we've been talking about movies. Has everyone on the panel seen Woman in Gold?
Yes, I have.
I haven't.
So I want to ask you, Bonang, when they make us a movie about your life, who would you like them to play you? Who's the best actor to play you?
Tony, you go.
No, Bonang first. Bonang first.
Yeah, it has to be maybe.
I've got one for you, Bonang.
Yeah, I was thinking Siloma Ngube. But if age was not a problem, I would have probably said the guys who did Island, the two of them. Any of those would be okay.
Okay, Tony, who would play you in the movie of your life?
Tom Hanks.
He's thought about that before, I can tell.
Because I was once told when I was younger, I was told I looked like him. Well, I didn't think I'd like to, but so it's always stuck with me. So yeah, he's a great actor.
Magda, who do you think should play you in the movie version of your book?
So again, if age wasn't an issue, it probably, kind of puts it out of, but Meryl Streep.
Exactly who I would have chosen for you.
I think
a good one.
Meryl Streep would be a fantastic Magda. And I asked this question because for those people who saw the movie Woman in Gold, Ryan Reynolds plays the lawyer. And I'm going to show everyone just the trailer from that. But the actual lawyer, Randy Schoenberg, who Ryan Reynolds plays, is coming on our webinar on the 20th, and he's going to be telling the story of he basically single-handedly got Austria to give up 5 Klimt paintings. The Woman in Gold painting itself was sold for $137 million to Ronald Lauder. At the time, the highest amount ever paid for a painting. So for those people who haven't seen it, I'm going to show you a quick 2-minute trailer of what the movie looked like, because on the 20th, we're going to be having our webinar with Randy Schoenberg, the lawyer from this show.
Yeah, and it's worth seeing before if you haven't seen it.
Your son, the lawyer, how is he? Some letters I found in my sister's belongings. I need advice from someone I can trust. Can't you just help me on the side?
There is no on the side. This is a full-time job.
Oh, how can you see out of those glasses? Filthy. Here she is, my aunt, Adela, painted by Gustav Klimt.
That's quite a painting.
She was taken off the walls of our home by the Nazis. And since then, she's been hanging in the Belvedere Gallery in Vienna.
And now you'd like to be reunited.
Wouldn't that be lovely? And then there's justice.
You really think a painting that ends up as a fridge magnet will ever leave Austria?
It'd be a mistake not to take a look.
Could you drive a little faster?
We're gonna be there 4 hours early.
But I want to buy perfume and cognac in duty-free.
I never thought I'd come back. That's our home on my wedding night. Half of Vienna was here.
Mrs. Altman, welcome to Vienna.
They're going to put as many obstacles in your way as possible.
We were gonna try and find a copy of your aunt's will.
Could have searched for the file on my own, you know.
I wasn't going to miss all the fun. This is like a James Bond film, and you're Sean Connery.
The painting belongs to Mrs. Altman's family. She is the Mona Lisa of Austria. We will fight you till the end for something we believe is ours.
They destroyed my family. They killed my friends, and they forced me to abandon the people and the places that I loved. I won't let them humiliate me again.
Here to file a lawsuit. We're taking the Austrian government to court. Have a nice day.
There's no way you're gonna win.
We didn't come here to eat cake. All along, you have thwarted me and closed the doors in my face.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a moment in history.
Once the past has been put to right, we will not have come here in vain. people see a masterpiece by one of Austria's finest artists. But I see a picture of my aunt, a woman who used to talk to me about life. We should be reunited with what is rightfully ours. Andy, can't you drive a little faster? Look, the chocolate on your donut is melting.
So don't forget, on the 20th, our webinar, The Woman in Gold, with Randy Schoenberg, the actual lawyer who fought all of the cases. So please don't forget to join us, and a big welcome to everyone tonight watching us on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Zoom. I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation this evening, but it is a conversation. It's not a monologue. So if you're watching us on YouTube, at the bottom of your screen or in the comment section, please put all your comments, your questions, and Benji, you're going to be trolling through Facebook and YouTube and making sure all of the questions come back onto Zoom here as well. And if you're watching us on Zoom, don't forget, both in the chat section and the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, ask a question, involve yourself in the conversation. We've brought you some amazing panelists, but the amazing panelists are going to be having a conversation not with us, but with you. So please take advantage of this, because we've gone and gotten some of the most interesting, maybe outspoken South Africans. And I want to start with you, Tony Leon. You sat in Parliament for many, many years. You sat through a number of presidential openings of Parliament, State of the Nation addresses. Tell us what it's like as a parliamentarian. What is this opening of Parliament like, and what is the State of the Nation all about?
I was first elected to Parliament in 1989, and I left in 2009, so it was 20 years, and some years there were 2 because we had an election. So they were really, as the content got less and less important, the flummery and the red carpet expanded. There were really only 2 State of the Nation speeches that I really think changed the course of the country. The obvious one, the very first I attended as an extreme backbencher, was on the 2nd of February 1990, which de Klerk, F.W. de Klerk, who died, as you know, on the 11th of November, basically changed the course of our history up until then in one 40-minute speech. And I have to say, de Klerk being more loyally than rhetorical, these amazing remarks, which were unheralded for a National Party politician and a conservative one at that, which he was at that point, were delivered in a very sort of matter-of-fact way. But of course, they were hugely dramatic. So that was the one. The second was the direct consequence of that speech and the 4 tumultuous years in between, was the first sitting of the Democratic Parliament in 1994 in May of the election, when Mandela was elected president and then made an extraordinarily evocative speech. He quoted that unbelievably tragic Afrikaans poet, Ingrid Jonker, and he really set the course for not just his presidency, but the country. And I have to say, after that speech, there was nothing really in terms of, did they achieve anything? Were they anything other than a public event or spectacle that really was in the dimension of those 2? I mean, the only other really dramatic moment from a president was, and we're living with the consequence of that today as well, was in 2006, when Thabo Mbeki was president, and he, from the same podium as those other 2 speeches in Parliament, now burnt down, but that's another story, he announced that he was releasing, as he put it diplomatically, Jacob Zuma from his position as Deputy President of South Africa, in other words, firing him. And that was certainly, in terms of its dramatic impact and consequence, as great as the other 2. But, the rest, it became a kind of, I thought, a vulgarized fashion parade. The presidents successively and serially have generally disappointed, because they either make statements that you can disprove the next year because they didn't happen, what they promised, or indeed there's an assumption that everything is going well when demonstrably it isn't going well, or that we can somehow defy the laws of political and economic gravity. So that's generally been the tenor, and sometimes they've been noteworthy, although I'd left Parliament by the time Zuma became president, because of the intense hostility towards the incumbent president, which doesn't pertain today. So that's my brief take on it.
So do we expect the president to stand up and give us the truth, the real state of the nation, or are we expecting him to stand up and give the best version of what he can?
I will tell you if this is Cyril Ramaphosa. I think it's his fourth year as president. If he was in America, he'd be up for re-election. But because he took over 1 year of Zuma's unexpired term, he isn't at the moment. And it would be very difficult to justify what has Cyril Ramaphosa done in the last 4 years that really is cause for optimism, other than the fact that he beat his opponent in Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma and the RET faction. That's his signal achievement, in my opinion. I think, if he comes with his normal thing that, of smart cities and bullet trains, I just think he will suffer from an enormous credibility gap. And I think if he's honest and credible, both those things, I don't know what he's going to say tomorrow night, he would have to acknowledge that this week alone, just never mind the last year, have been absolutely shape-shifting in South Africa. On the one hand, you had this devastating report, which to his credit, he did appoint the panel and he published the results on the July insurrection in Durban and in Gauteng, which is devastating in terms of the failures of leadership, including in his office and in his person. And we've got this ongoing debacle, the second part, which was also manifest in the last few days, of the appointment of the Chief Justice or the non-appointment of the Chief Justice or the traducing of judicial officers by basically scumbag politicians, which I think you have to say they are, the people who went after Dustin Mlamba, who's really an outstanding jurist and did not deserve that kind of, revolting treatment, which was not only aided and abetted by the chairman of the JSC, but was, authored by an advocate of the Supreme Court, a senior counsel, Mohale, and by Julius Malema. Perhaps you don't expect more from him. But the truth is that this attack on the judiciary and judicial officers is being fueled by a senior member of Ramaphosa's own cabinet, Lindiwe Sisulu, who attacked them from another perspective, talking about House Negroes, independent judges who happen to be black. And, the president has so far, apart from a few bromides, been entirely silent on this matter. So he set in train these events for the Chief Justice appointment. He needn't have done it this way. And I think he needs to actually man up and say, look, there have been some mistakes. There's been failures on my watch, and this is what I'm going to do. That's what he should do. I don't have a high expectation he will do it, and we can talk about all the rest during the program.
So, Bonang, let us say you had the opportunity to actually make the State of the Nation address tomorrow evening. Other than the fantastic fashion show, which I'm sure will look amazing, what would you get up on the podium and what would you actually say?
But to be honest, I think South Africans are tired of the history and the promises. It was Mikhail Gorbachev who gave us glasnost and perestroika, who said we knew that the party was over when all we could do is talk about our history. So for me, I would start by addressing the 2 weeks in July, because it led to 60.1 million South Africans to have a collective trauma from which they have not recovered. I would then also go on to complete the state capture report implementation, not just the conversation about it. So we've got report 1, report 2, report 3 we'll get by the end of this month, but you already have 2 reports that are fairly indicative of the depth and the width of the industrial scale looting. Number 3, I would talk about how we are going to complete the vaccine rollout, because that to us is a matter of the difference between life and death, but also economically speaking. The country that would reap the benefits of having defeated this pandemic first will also reap the pent-up global tourism demand. There is no bigger risk that we are confronted with today than the almost 74.9% youth unemployment. Second only probably to an unreliable, unpredictable electricity supply, which is the fourth means of production. And then lastly, of course, I'll talk about the economic growth, because if the economy is not growing, very soon we'll be talking about the redistribution of poverty, not the redistribution of wealth. It's only when the economy is growing, you can have jobs created in both outsized and oversized type of impact. And as businesses, we don't create jobs in and of themselves. We create jobs so that we can create markets of the future. Lastly, it's about also transformation. This economy must be broadly reflective of its demographics. 51% of this population is female. Women's representation in positions of leadership is less than 24%. African women, less than 4%. Thanks, Howard.
So, Magda, let us say you had the opportunity. Bonang is talking about the empowerment of women, but you came here from scratch. You're a South African by choice, not a South African by birth like the rest of us, which puts you in a unique position. You chose us. So given that, if you were to stand up on that podium tomorrow night, what would you tell the nation?
Look, this is weird. I mean, I was 12 years old when I arrived here. So, my parents chose South Africa, but I chose to remain here at a time when, with actuarial qualifications, 1994, most of my peers emigrated. So, the one thing is, and, what do I expect of Cyril? Well, he's a politician and he's got 2 years to election. So I think he's going to sum up things, in one sentence, which is, we failed on some fronts, but, and the but we have heard and we have heard and we have heard, and, there's no surprise in that. I think for average South Africans, there's also no surprise in the reports that have come out in terms of corruption. What is it that we have learned that we didn't, from Zondo reports, that we didn't know before about SAA or Transnet, and there are a few more chapters. So if I was him, I would tackle this thing head on and, deal with the fact that there are, corruption exists all around the world. But I always talk about the fact that there are two types of corruption. There is functional corruption and dysfunctional corruption. So functional corruption is something like China, where the government kind of strikes a little bit of a social compact with the population. And the social compact is, let us steal what we want to steal, but we will make the economy work. We will create jobs, we will make sure infrastructure works. Dysfunctional corruption is what we've lived through in South Africa. India, another example, where there's just looting and there is no giving back. And I think, if I was him, which I don't expect him to do at all, but I would stand up, acknowledge this fact, and say that, he will dedicate the next 2 years to turning this dysfunctional corruption to functional corruption. The other thing, which, I read the statistic the other day that, worldwide, 90% of jobs are created, it's an average, but 90% of jobs are created by the private sector, not by the public sector. So again, I would stand up and talk about the fact that we are embracing Business South Africa. We are in partnership with Business South Africa, and we will together make this country work, as opposed to vilifying the private sector, despite the fact that, the private sector has become more and more representative of the population of South Africa. I mean, I'm not talking about, at the very echelons of billionaires, but if you look at, an average company, and the demographic, they are increasingly reflecting the demographics of South Africa. So, I would be honest with the nation. I would also talk about the fact that there are no easy solutions. We are deeply in debt. We've got record levels of unemployment. We've got no education system to speak of. And there's a litany of, kind of failed report card in terms of delivery. So I would stand up and basically talk about how and who I'm appointing to address all of these issues. But, I don't expect any of it to happen.
What?
So Tony, let's actually deal with one issue. Let's talk about politics. You have a fairly good grasp of what's happening on the ground. What happens in our next elections? We've just had local government elections. The ANC slipped below that important 50% mark, but mainly because people stayed away. What are you predicting for our next national elections? Will we be in the world of coalition governments? And is it likely, what sort of coalition will we have? Will we have the anti-ANC coalition, or will we have the ANC and the EFF, or the ANC and the DA, or the ANC and Herman Mashaba?
Well, I should just throw up my hands and say, who knows? Any of those scenarios you sketched are possible, except the one I would stick my neck out on is that the ANC will not get more than 50% of the vote in the next election. They're on a downward slide. And actually, in the last general election, they only got 28% of the universe of voters who could have voted for them, although it was disguised by the fact that that they got a lot of seats because they still got most of the votes, the people who went to vote. In the last municipal election, we had both those factors. They got a lower percentage, not just of the universe of voters, but of the actual voters. And I can't see, Ramaphosa is going to use this basic income grant, I think, to try and keep support or buy support. But really, at 350 Rand a month, you're going to be very hard pressed to have enormous gratitude for a government which delivers that, as opposed to a national minimum wage of 3,500 Rand a month, or even more than that. So, I mean, there's a 10 times differential between the legal pay of what you've got to pay workers and the sort of handout, as it were. So there's nothing Ramaphosa can do to address that, except to further bankrupt the country. We're instantly borrowing more than R1 billion a day just to pay the debt that Magda highlighted in her comments, R1 billion a day plus. And we're crowding out all the other spending. If you want to go around the neighborhoods or a township and see why there's so many potholes outside of Cape Town, I have to say, and why the grass isn't cut and why the sewers are running through the streets, or the sewerage, it's because we have so little money left over after we paid the social grants, paid the debt, and paid the public servants to actually spend on infrastructure. So I don't see any of those things that really repel people, together with corruption and the absence of interdicting the corrupt. That's another point, incidentally, that, Sean Abrams might have been compromised in the Zoomite. Our current director of public prosecutions, Ms. Batowi, seems to be a snail. He was a sheep, she's a snail, as someone said. So you're not getting the corrupt behind bars wearing orange uniforms. So no one's going to see, I don't think there's something dramatic happens in the next years, those who are responsible for the plundering of our resources going to jail. And I mean, that puts the ANC in a very difficult position. And the ANC, Ramaphosa told us last August, he would rather be a weak president than preside over the disintegration of his party. But actually, you can't move forward while the crooks and the charlatans and the RETs stay together with the more mainstream constitutionalists such as Ramaphosa himself. It's just not possible, both pulling in totally different directions. I think the electorate will react against that, and I think they'll do it either by staying away or by voting for an opposition party. How that plays out in the post-electoral situation will be very difficult to determine. You've got on the one hand, Herman Mashaba, who is vehemently anti-ANC, probably more so than the DA, but he's equally in a somewhat cozy relationship with the EFF, whom he keeps trying to introduce into local government structures in Joburg and Kuruleni. So I don't know how that works out. And of course, the easiest option for the ANC, to quote my friend Moletsi and Becky, is for them to form a coalition with the EFF. But of course, if they do that, and I might be wrong here, I just cannot imagine a number of mainstream ANC figures, some of whom I know, some of whom I don't know, sticking around to share power with Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu. I just don't think that's possible. So if the ANC is below 50 and they then rely on someone else like the EFF, that's going to have consequences. If, on the other hand, the DA keeps what it's got, which is a modest 23%, it can become a player if the ANC or a faction of the ANC goes into business with it. So I think there are a lot of possibilities, but I am quite clear now, and look, I was the leader of the opposition for 13 years, that South Africa cannot progress, it cannot move forward with the ANC continuing as a government, as it has governed or misgoverned for these past few years, and with the same policies which have not worked and which they double down on again and again. So something's got to give, to quote a movie title. And I think it might be messy, but I think it's a necessary second transition, because after 28 years, it'll be 30 years at the next election of uninterrupted one-party rule.
Benji, join us at any point.
So maybe maybe this is a good intro, and Bonang, maybe you'll answer one of the audience's questions, where they ask, will the State of the Nation be an address to try and win the elections in December and appease some of the ANC factions? I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
So first, Benji, let me start by saying the State of the Nation happens tomorrow evening in an environment where the ANC is a waning, corrupt, morally bankrupt, self-serving, self-indulgent, self-absorbed, rent-seeking, mostly rural, indecisive party, now best known for dithering on key socio-economic issues with a tempestuous approach to policy. It has actually become synonymous with state capture, lack of service delivery, and leading by commissions and coalitions. I agree with Tony that when you are on the decline, it's much harder to stop the slippage than when you are up the creek, probably without a pedal. So the ANC has given up power, not lost power. It gave up power, never to regain it again. You go everywhere, which is the normal crucible of elections of the ANC. We have on average 7 service deliveries a day, every day. Just simple things. We had the crisis of electricity, now is the crisis of water. Next is going to be a crisis of leadership.
Bonang, I want to pick up on one issue that seems to have arisen now. Before, we would say that Herman Mashaba was the one who was synonymous with xenophobia. And suddenly it seems to have become an issue for the EFF, who have become even more xenophobic than Herman Mashaba. And suddenly one of the people are asking us on the chat as well, we see this entire thing that the plan is to get rid of Zimbabweans, some of whom have been here for decades, and to send them back to Zimbabwe. I mean, enormously impractical solutions, but maybe attempting to gain popular support. Has the ANC, in fact, given in to xenophobic populism?
You see, the sad part is that this used to be a party driven by principles. And these are contained not in the main body of our constitution, but in the preamble. And this builds from the 27th of June, 1955, clipped down Freedom Charter that had 10 principles. And what I love about the preamble, it starts by saying, we the people. My own words, not the politicians. And it goes on to say, recognizing the past injustices. And then towards the middle, it then both implores and mandates Tony and I to fix these past injustices. But you see, those 3 principles on which it is based, first is democratic principles. That's what we chose. Social justice and fundamental human rights. Now we deny the Dalai Lama to come here, who's worked side by side with us to make sure that we get free. We forget the people that imposed sanctions, the people that launched the UDF, the young kids that set this country on fire on the 16th of June, 1976, and we want to appropriate only to the exiles our liberation and indeed our freedom. Those principles, when we vote in the United Nations Security Council, we have forgotten that we ourselves were beneficiaries of other countries coalescing and declaring 187 countries apartheid as a crime against humanity. Now we seem to be embroiled in politics of the stomach.
Can I just add to what Bonang said, and I would only say amen to him. Here's a thing. This is from the front page of Business Day on Monday, which I cut out. That it is leaked by the presidency that Ramaphosa is going to say something about job reservations coming back, folks. Job reservation now for against non-South Africans. That's on the page 1 of the Business Day. And then page 2 is a speech that Ramaphosa made saying Africa must speak with one voice. Now, you know, you've got both these, this absolute double thing happening on page 1 and page 2 of Business Day on Monday, coming from the same source, actually, because Ramaphosa say, oh, Africans stand together, Pan-Africanism in combating climate change, but actually we're going to keep them out of South Africa, restrict their jobs, even though some are, you know, Bonang mentioned at the beginning, our tourism industry is an absolute game changer in terms of jobs and economic growth. I mean, if you remove every Zimbabwean from the hospitality and tourism industry in South Africa, it will close down tomorrow, certainly in Cape Town.
So let me add, you know, perhaps a little bit of a different, you know, kind of slant. I mean, not a different slant, but maybe say a few things that, you know, are a little bit more optimistic if, you know, things went the right way. So, you know, the most horrific headline or the most scary headline that, you know, I read was actually not what Tony showed, but with the latest load shedding, Eskom stating that they've got lack of maintenance, lack of skills, and lack of money. So this is the provider, monopolistic provider of electricity to South Africa, and they are basically admitting that they've got nothing to give South Africa. So you know, the issue of blocking foreigners from coming to South Africa is, you know, horrific in terms of its implications, because in fact, we should be importing skills. In fact, we're in a position where we should be recalling people from retirement who know how to maintain power stations to work on the power stations. And again, importing technology, you know, insisting on technology transfer like China does. You know, Tanya, you mentioned the fact that there is no money for infrastructure projects. That's not true. There is heck of a lot of money
in the private sector, sure,
waiting to be deployed into credible infrastructure projects.
No, I absolutely agree.
You know, I sat on a panel, government panel. It was, you know, one of the investment, I think the second investment forum that Cyril held. And, you know, I was, you know, part of the debate on infrastructure projects. And, you know, the representative presidency said, you know, I'm going to make up the number, but I think he said something like, you know, they've got 76 projects ready to go, investable projects that they are going to put out to the private sector. Well, we're still waiting. 2 years later, we are waiting for investable projects. You know, I had an investment strategy meeting with the Sygnia team today. And again, a statement was made, well, when the infrastructure projects come online, they are going to be such attractive investments from a yield perspective that, you know, the private sector asset managers will allocate money. International foreigners will come in just for the yield that they're getting, you know, in a kind of zero interest rate global environment. But give me those infrastructure projects, which, you know, given the lack of credibility of ANC in terms of corruption, cannot but be private public sector collaborations. No one trusts.
I completely take that point. Just to add, there's a very interesting article written the other day by Anne Bernstein of the CDE, where just on the issue of infrastructure projects, she said, you know, there's a unit in President Ramaphosa's office that identifies the projects and helps, but they've identified 76 and none have come on stream. You said, so Anne asked an article, well, why not just start with 5 or 6, not 76? But a friend of mine, the Treasury, said the problem with Cyril, he loves big numbers, but, you know, you can recite big numbers, but, you know, talk is cheap, money buys the whiskey.
So that's exactly what I said on the panel. Give me 4 projects, 4 credible projects to invest in, which each one creates 2,000 jobs, you know, and we will be investors in those projects. But I haven't seen one.
So Magda, you speak about credibility. What would you do in order to restore credibility? Should we see some people go to jail? Is that one of those things that we hold on to? If we saw Zuma back in jail, if we saw some senior politicians who were named in the Zondo report back in jail, does that give us the credibility to move forward? Or do we kind of just move on and look for credibility from something else?
So look, you know, I was involved in, you know, various initiatives involved with, you know, fighting corruption. You know, I was placed under illegal state surveillance as a consequence. And, someone asked me the other day, so, whether I regret the things that I've done. And, there were some things that I've done. And I said, I don't regret what I've done, despite the impact it had on my family, but I regret the fact that it actually made no difference. So to me, look, if you look at the people who are, involved in state capture and who are currently, look at the pandemic and, the amount of theft that happened, while humanity was, questionably facing one of its greatest challenges. I don't expect anyone to go to jail, by the way. And because I don't expect anyone to go to jail, I don't actually focus on the past. I don't think that putting, few people in jail is going to restore any credibility with anyone, because, no one has the expectation, and it actually doesn't contribute anything to growing the economy going forward, to dealing with education issues, to dealing, in dealing with unemployment issues in this country. So from my perspective, I think Zondo, in many ways was kind of a version of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where, all these things were put on the table, the people were exposed. We actually, in order to restore credibility, and when you talk about, restoring credibility, you are really talking about, you're expecting foreign investments to happen. You expect South Africans to not emigrate, but to stay in this country and invest in the economy here, to start businesses, to create jobs. Then, in order to restore that credibility, we should be looking at things such as, reforming a tax system. We shouldn't discourage companies from opening businesses here. If I was Cyril right now, I would announce tax breaks to any foreign company that builds a plant in South Africa and employs 2,000 people. For 15 years, no corporate taxes, and, rely on the fact that you've got job creation and you've got payroll and VAT taxes. So from my perspective, and having been involved in the depth of trying to fight corruption, I actually think, it's not a battle that we will win. Putting people in jail is irrelevant, largely irrelevant, as much as, we would want vengeance. Really, is that what we're going to focus our energies on? Or should we be focusing our energies on actually rebuilding South Africa? And, ANC, if put under sufficient pressure, can pull a rabbit out of the hat. Because let's look at the vaccines and the procurement of vaccines. They actually managed it against all odds. They managed to get Johnson & Johnson, they managed to get Pfizer into the country where, many other emerging markets have failed. So when put under pressure by broader population, they actually can come together and organize something against all odds. The other thing, Tanya, just to talk to the point of, again, I don't know what's going to happen in the elections. I think, ANC will be, probably either at 48% or 51%. But if it goes to 48, and you talk about coalitions and you look at the municipal elections, a lot of people reach out to me, and, people from ANC did reach out to me. And they, the kind of singular message was that if there is a coalition to be formed, they would much rather form that coalition with DA than EFF. And that it's DA that isn't coming to the party, rather than, the ANC, which, publicly can't be seen, but actually are willing, because they know that that's, the only credible future for South Africa.
Can I just respond just on that point, Magda? I do show some reluctance because I am absolutely not planning a comeback to the DA leadership. I'm the one leader who left and doesn't plan to go back in another capacity. I know, but that's just a joke. But it's also the truth. I mean, I'm quite happy to, and I give advice occasionally, solicited or unsolicited, but I'm not involved in the management of the DA. But I think what happened in those coalitions in all those municipalities, which the DA currently somewhat tenuously has the mayoralty on, is the DA did not intend, or had outside of Pretoria, Tshwane, which really did have enough seats to form a stable coalition without even the EFF, and even Action SA wasn't that relevant there. What happened in Joburg and Kuruleni, they put up candidates with no expectation that they would win the mayoralties. And then what Malema and Mashaba did was to basically vote for the DA despite their rather strong dislike of the DA on the basis we'll give the ANC a bloody nose. So I think that forestalled just the actual practicalities of on the day of the elections, of the mayoral elections, the DA cooperating with the ANC because they suddenly found themselves in power. Now, I do think there are elements in the DA, or the DA as an entity, was a much smaller part in the ANC, and parts of the ANC that could work together around a common program. And I think for the country, that could be a very good thing because they could reinforce each other's strengths and mitigate each other's weaknesses. But they certainly couldn't do it with the ANC holus bolus, as the ANC now is, with the ANC pursuing this anti-growth, anti-business, anti-minority political program, and very weak on the rule of law, as we know and as we've discussed today. But, I think if there was a scenario where there could be a greater cooperation in the center, I think the DA should and would embrace it. And that's kind of what the DA said. They said they want to, help create a governing coalition in the center of the politics, not in the extremes. Well, I think there are people in the ANC who are centrist, but I think they are pursuing policies that are anti-centrist, if you like. And maybe that's precisely for the point Bonang identified early on, that everything that Cyril's going to say tomorrow has got nothing to do with the national interest, actually. It's got everything to do with his elective conference in December. But, if I were him, I'd just go for broke. I mean, what's he got to lose? Even if he gets re-elected by a big majority as president, he wants to preside over this country as the least successful president ever since 1994, because the ANC will lose power if it continues on its trajectory. There'll be more people out of work under his baton on the current path than there were under Jacob Zuma. And maybe there'll be, less overt corruption, but there won't be much action taken against it with all the thieves and crooks still sitting inside the NEC. So, if I were him, but I'm not him, I would really go for broke. Well,
Tony, I want to ask you about your former party. Is it not
it's still my party? I'm not a deserter. I always dance with the one that brought me to politics. So I stay dear, but I'm not involved.
But Tony, you look mighty pale. And it's difficult to find someone in leadership within that party that looks darker than you.
Well, it's an accident of birth, as I said to Steenhuisen. I said, you've got a birth defect, and maybe that is a defect in South Africa, although we are meant to be a country of equal citizenship. But leaving aside that constitutional nicety, which is largely observed only in the breach, I think there are quite a lot of people of prominence in the DA who are black, but probably not in the top leadership of the party right now, but a lot of the mayoral committee people and so forth. I think in Johannesburg, there's a DA black mayor. I think most of the mayor of Tshwane whose DA is not white. I think he's colored. And I think if you did a troll of all their mayoral committee members, most of them aren't white either. And the DA has far more black MPs, members of parliament, black African MPs, as a percentage of its caucus than it has black African votes. So actually, if you would just simply say, look, the DA should reflect its own electorate, there'd be more whites in the party, not fewer whites. Now, of course, Howard, I'm not a schoolboy and I'm not an innocent. I understand exactly what you're saying. You're saying that a party that wants to govern South Africa has to look like the majority of South Africans. And I think that's absolutely a fair point. But if you do it in a way that becomes the only consideration you have, you can land up with an accident. And I've written a book, and I don't want to go into it. It's in future tense, 2 chapters on the DA. I think the DA became so convinced that its only solution was to elect a black leader, that whatever his advantages or disadvantages might have been, it promoted people who didn't have the party experience into top leadership positions. And that didn't work out either with the electorate, because the party went backwards, or in terms of the management of the party. And I do not say for a single nanosecond that whites should occupy a leadership position as whites. But I think the party as an institution has to be true to itself, not to some kind of racial agenda, but what its principles, programs, and its outlook is. And I'm all for when I took over the DP leadership, I said it looked like a combination of the Rand Club and the Broederbond, because it was entirely white English and Afrikaans. And so, we set in a very aggressive program of making the party more representative. But it's not it's a process, not an event. But I don't think the DA, the DA doesn't get votes or not get votes because of the top person in the party. There are a whole lot of other reasons in the community that determine how people vote. Because truthfully, when it had a black leader at the top of the party, it went backwards in the election, and it didn't make progress on any front. It went backwards in the white areas, and it went backwards in the black areas from the election before. So you've got to say, just simply a change at the top doesn't change the dynamics of a party. I think what has caused the DA harm, and I think this is a real thing, and whether it's true or not, is the label that's been stuck around his neck after 24 years. And you could say it did a lot of it was self-adhesive by the party itself, that it is a white party, or it's going to bring back apartheid when demonstrably it won't, or it's going to take away social grants. We're 18 million grant recipients. I think that kind of intense campaign has held the party back. But I don't think simply, choosing X as leader rather than Y is going to change that trajectory, in my view.
So I'm getting a bit of pressure from our viewers for our panelists to pin their nail to the flag on this one. Do you think we will see a different president post December this year? Like a simple yes or no. Once he's secured that election, do you think we'll see the president that we all hoped through the Ramaphosa kind of thing, where we thought we were going to get this profound leader, and I think to say we've been disappointed is an understatement. Maybe Bonang, we can start with you. And Bonang, someone thanked you, said maybe you should be a bit more honest in your view. They just said maybe you didn't make your view a bit clearer. But what's your view on whether we're going to see the real Ramaphosa?
I think Ramaphosa is not our second chance. He's our last hope. If we mess it this time, we are just going to be another failed African country. So all indications are, come the ANC elective conference, he will be elected. And I'm hoping that because it will be his second term in the ANC, he'll go for broke. Because instinctively, he knows what needs to be done, but he's yet to find his spy. Thank you.
Magda, I can see you shaking your head. What's your...
I think what you're seeing is what you're getting. I think optics are deceptive. I think we pinned our hopes to optics. We didn't realize that, as I said, optics are deceptive. The man you're seeing is the man we are going to see for the remainder of his term. He is not, he's not strategic. In fact, the words used when he was described to me, when he was elected, was non-strategic and indecisive. And that came from, a very close circle of his. And that is what you are seeing. You are seeing a president that kind of sits on the fence, that can't make a decision, that isn't prepared to make a decision. There are no, even NEC had to call on him to make a decision in terms of, Lindile attacking the judiciary. And NEC said to him, it's a decision of the president to do something about this. It's not the decision of the NEC. And he did nothing. So I think that we are, pinning our hopes to, as I said, the optics of the man. I think he's charming. I think, he has the charisma around him. But, will he make the hard decisions? Will he suddenly develop a strategy for the country? No. And I'll bet any amount of money on that.
Magda, while I've got you on stage here, there's someone asking for you to please phonetically say your surname so that they can pronounce it properly.
Actually, it's a phonetic surname, because Polish language is a phonetic language in terms of, every letter is pronounced in exactly the same way. So my surname is Wierzycka. But there's a nuance to Polish language, and there are some sounds which are composed of two words, which South Africans just can't get around. And that is RZ is pronounced as Z. And unfortunately, in terms of English language, everyone tends to split my surname at exactly that point. And hence, the mispronunciations. But actually, if you just remember the Z in the middle, then it becomes very simple. It's Wierzycka.
Very good. And so if you had to define the 4 or 5 projects that at your investment meeting, that it would be a go, what would those be where you would be super happy, super ready to kind of take off? What would those 4 or 5 projects be?
So look, a lot of these projects would require, some adjustments to regulations, but the first one would be renewables, independent power production in every form, allow people to produce their own power, allow them to link to the grid. So all of those projects are kind of, number one priority. The second one is infrastructure, water infrastructure, because, it's one thing to deal with, the blackouts. It's another thing to deal with the fact that, there is no water or the water is not fit for consumption. Then you are dealing with some, humanitarian crisis on as massive a scale as the pandemic. And our water infrastructure has not been, maintained since, again, 30 years ago. Nothing has happened on that front. So anything to do with water infrastructure. The third one would be transportation, rail system. We are dependent in terms of, transference of goods to ports and, in the opposite direction on rail transport. So anything to do with transportation, fixing of railways, making it more efficient, making, ports more efficient. So again, projects involving transport. And, that also talks to obviously fixing the roads and the potholes. So those would be my 3 projects.
One of our viewers has asked, and maybe you can help, I think it will be so profound coming from you, to try and get a sense. You said there's like lots of private money or money to be spent. In your view, what sort of kind of money are you talking about in the private sector that you think in the right kind of climate would be able to be spent in South Africa? What do you think that number is?
Billions. And the reason is that, look, the money isn't coming from nowhere. The money is coming from pension funds in South Africa, including the government employees pension fund, including Eskom pension fund, which, has over 100 billion in assets. And regulation has just been adjusted to allow pension funds to invest up to, 15% of the assets in infrastructure projects. Now, the willingness is there. So if you actually think of the pension fund industry, excluding the PIC as an asset manager of GEPF, as exceeding 1 trillion rand, you really are talking about massive amounts of money, and we're not even touching on foreign investments which would flow into the country, because literally people are struggling. At the moment, I think the number is 60% of global debt that is available to purchase is yielding negative interest rates. So foreign investors are looking, if you put something on the table in the order of 6, 7, 8% in terms of infrastructure projects, you would have billions pouring into the country. But again, you would have to restore the confidence of foreign investors in terms of they invest, they can take their money out. Now, the biggest fraud that has been perpetuated on South Africans in many ways, and, wealthy South Africans, has been the fact that Tito Mboweni talked about relaxation foreign exchange controls, whereas behind everyone's backs, he produced 7 or 8 directives plus briefings to all the banks, and in fact has tightened foreign exchange controls. So if I have, any money and, and I have money to invest, why would I build a business in South Africa if I don't have the confidence that I can take my dividends out? If I don't have the confidence that, the projects are not going to be destroyed, and I'm not going to be blocked in terms of the liquidity of the flow of money. So these are the kind of issues that this government actually has to deal with. sooner or later. It's a little bit like, the collapse of communism, the collapse of apartheid. At the end of the day, all these regimes collapsed because they ran out of money. There was no huge moment of, Damascus moment of, this is wrong, this is right, we are going to. These regimes ran out of money, and hence they had to change. And I think that exactly the same thing will happen in South Africa if ANC remains in power. If we have a coalition, then actually anything can happen. The worst thing actually in the world, if you look at, global politics, is coalition governments, because they are typically just weak governments.
So Bonang, I want to ask, my sense is that everything that Magda has told us now, the president knows. There's nothing new here. If we sat down with him and he were to list what we do, he would give you the exact same list that Magda just did. So why doesn't he act? What is the thing that stops him being the president we'd love him to be?
So first, I think it was General George Patton who said great wars are won by good execution, not great plans, because good execution will save even a mediocre plan. Our problem has been the doing, the execution. If there was an Olympic sport about developing plans, South Africa will win hands down. China, by 2010, was on to their 12th five-year strategy, driven by two things and two things only. Number one is personal security. Number two is energy security. Singapore, that was fired by its parent, Malaysia, has been driving only three things. Number one is this notion of meritocracy. Number two is pragmatism. And then number three is honesty. And they're so simple that if you bring a new law, you must also come with a proposal that says, here's a law that I propose should be taken out. We have overcomplicated this. For me, two events have really been absolutely seminal. The 2 weeks in July of rampant looting, where all of us were shocked that the people who are constitutionally mandated to protect us, they folded their arms and did nothing because of ineptitude, incompetence, but also because the money had run out. They didn't even have enough bulletproof vests, rubber bullets, or even tear gas canisters. But I mean, the Zondo Commission, for me, it's important. You see, Magda, we are not driven by vengeance. If you take something that doesn't belong to you, you must be charged, convicted, sentenced, and serve time. It sends a strategic conversation to ourselves and to foreign direct investors that we are open for business. We can't spend R1 billion on the 4th of July. We get this report 4 years later, 400 days of hearings, more than 300 witnesses, and 1,438 individuals that are implicated. That comes in 3 volumes. Just report number 1. The first volume deals with SA and its associated companies. The second one with the New Age. This is the heart of the Guptas. The last one, of course, talks about South African revenue services, which is the subject not of one, but of 2 commissions of inquiry, Zondo and Nugent Commission, and all of them put the same people right in the center. We estimate the work that we did, that in the first 5 years of state capture of the 9 wasted years, 1.5 trillion South African rands was stolen.
You're right, but I'm pragmatic. So, all the evidence that came out in Zondo was available in written format, in emails in 2017. Trust me, I know. I read every one of these emails. And no one did anything in 2017. No one did anything in 2018. One of the top silks in South Africa who spent 20 years in NPA and then said to me, he became so despondent working for NPA that he moved into, he said criminal silk, started defending criminals, top criminals in the country. But, he said to me, there's this kind of very simple way of prosecuting people. You don't overcomplicate the case. You don't try to prosecute people on everything that they've done. It's what I call a stolen pencil theory. You take one little crime, one piece of theft that they've committed. The simplest thing, you prosecute them on that. You put them in jail for that. Then you can build, bigger cases around it. And that evidence was and has been available to do exactly that. And it hasn't happened.
Look, speaking as a deep...
Before you speak, I just want to remind everyone watching that they can ask any question they want. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom. There's on YouTube. There's a comment section on Facebook. There's a comment section. Ask any question you want, and Benji will make sure that your question is posed to our panel as well. So, sorry, Tony, you were saying.
Just speaking as a detribalized attorney, let me just say this, that I'm a bit of a rule of law fundamentalist like Bonang, and not just for strategic reasons. I actually think if the rule of law goes, and it's under, it's in a very tenuous thread here, what's left of it, then everything goes. I think you can have terrible economic policies. We've got those as well at the moment. But if you don't have a robust rule of law, you haven't really got a society, you've got lawlessness. And I think what Bonang identified in the July insurrection was a species of lawlessness, not just that nothing has happened in the last 7 months. Another Ramaphosa broken promise. We know the instigators, we're going to bring them to book. Well, hello, 7 months later, no one's been brought to book. But actually that people feel that they can destroy property, brazenly loot stores, walk away with that famous purple couch, remember that one? And load it into a bucky, because there are going to be no consequences. When I was in politics, I once said the ANC actually stands for absolutely no consequences. Well, it is ever more so. So I think you've got to do it. And just on the mechanics, I completely agree with Magda. Go for this. Zuma, one of the reasons this trial's been going on for, 20 years or whatever, there's 700 charges. They should, but that's a sign of an incompetent prosecution. Not a competent one would have gone for 4. And for all the people that Bonang mentioned, gave the statistics who've been identified with Zuma, half of those number were guilty of perjury, were found just by his honor to have committed perjurious acts before the commission, which is itself a criminal offense. So go for that. The famous thing about how they got, who was that chief mafiosi, Al Capone, they got him income tax evasion. They couldn't find one person who could safely testify against him in Chicago because they'd be murdered. Testify against him. They got him on income tax, and that's what he went to Alcatraz for. And, as well. And then on the mechanics, final point, and then I'm really going to yield the floor, as they used to say in Parliament. The final point is this. We have a lot of advocates in this country, and they're not all Dali and Porfu. Some are actually competent. And a lot of them at the junior bar in Joburg and Cape Town and Durban, who actually don't have that much work. If you bring them into the NPA on a contracted basis, just like we did with SARS in the good days, when Pravin was running it first, they contracted out, they brought in outsiders. They weren't subject to the public service requirements. They weren't subject to employment equity. They brought in bounty hunters into SARS. I'm talking about accounting bounty hunters, not criminal ones. And that's how the collections were so outstanding. They made it a special agency. It wasn't the normal public service. They did that with the NPA, and they brought in outsiders who actually are legally competent and are unafraid to prosecute and know how to prosecute or draw up a charge sheet. I think you'd have a very different picture.
It's section 38, Tony, of the Constitution about the appointment of counsel. It's there. If we used it, honestly, I think the NPA would have been 50% of the way, instead of now really going at a snail pace. Thank you.
So, that's a suggestion. That's a suggestion I also made, ages ago, of outsourced prosecutions to people who know what they're doing. There are plenty of skills in this country. But in addition to that, we actually need a broader court system. So, bringing a case, just to give you an idea, I have my Iqbal Serve issues. I sued him for defamation, 3 different cases against independent media, 2018. My court date has been set for October 2022. I get 1 day in court. So the pace of not only the prosecutions, but the pace at which the judiciary is moving, just because of the lack of capacity on that front, is such that, if you wanted to prosecute everybody, and I mean everybody, it would take 100 years. And, today I was driving, listening to the radio, and, they were talking about Tshwane, because Tshwane has started cutting off electricity. And it was very obvious, and they're cutting electricity to businesses, people who are not paying or haven't paid. And what became very obvious to me when they started listing the offenders, that the offenders were, there's some huge hotel that got cut off. So the offenders are both, in the public sector as well as in the private sector. Businesses have not paid, hotels have not paid, individuals have not paid. So this problem in South Africa is that, this lawlessness has become pervasive in society. Almost no one is complying with the laws. It's as simple as no one is paying parking tickets or speeding fines. So how do you actually deal with the fact that, if you really want to prosecute everybody, you are at the point of having to prosecute half the country, which is not to say that we shouldn't have a robust judiciary, that we shouldn't have robust prosecuting authorities, and that we shouldn't make examples of certain very high profile cases. And preferably the ones where asset forfeiture unit has been in first to attach their assets so they can't do the Zuma thing of, the Stalingrad strategy. But, the reality is at some stage, we actually do need to move forward and move forward with, as I said, robust judiciary, restoring of NPA's powers, outsourcing. But we actually have to move forward because there are more important things to do than putting Zuma in jail.
So on that note, I think that's a good segue into kind of moving to a point. I know I run a medium-sized business, and I've asked a lot of my colleagues around who run other businesses, some listed, some not, has the idea of the parliament burning down on the second or third day of the year come up in one of the meetings? And from all of them, they said it hasn't come up. And then one of my friends actually answered, who runs a big property group, he answered, yes, it had come up. And I was shocked. He said, yeah, no, they were looking for some rental space. So it came up. And I think the segue is with these problems that we've like kind of spoken about so much. What are your kind of hope lines and leaving messages of that incredible South African resilience and spirit that drives us forward no matter what? Bonang, maybe we can start with you. What would the message be for our viewers in terms of what to hold on to and what to focus on?
So for me, that resilience says all of us must have a full appreciation that this country does not only belong to the politicians, it belongs to all social partners. When business fought very hard and forced this ANC-led government to do certain things, 4 things were achieved just in the last 6 months. SAA was privatized. Labour hates that word privatization, but it was semi-privatized. Secondly, municipalities can now procure electricity from sources other than Eskom. Thirdly, companies can now self-generate their own electricity up to 100 megawatts. Remember, the limit was 1, we were praying for 5, we got 100. And then lastly, even the backbone of our infrastructure, which is Transnet, now says they are happy to have private-public partnerships in ports like Durban. I think it's a major win. Thank you, Benji.
Bonang, let me ask you this. What do you think happened with the energy increase in power? It seemed like that was a Ramaphosa moment of control, where there was so much talk, and then they increased the number that the private generation. What do you think happened there? I'm just interested in your opinion.
It was just a moment that took all of us by surprise, because from 1, we were lobbying hard for 50 megawatts, and he took us to 100 megawatts. So for once, he found his spine, and it actually worked. So we were pleasantly surprised.
I was very hopeful that was a start. Maybe Magda, you'll give us what kind of your hope is and what your advice to our viewers to cling on to.
the truth of the matter is that, if you actually look at July last year, I think, for many people, communities coming together, defending their neighborhoods will be the defining moment of their lives. And I think that the reality is, we've got an economy and a functioning economy. We've got a very sophisticated financial services industry in this country. We've got, economies and countries tend to have a momentum, and we have a momentum. The ANC and the brief period in history that ANC is in power, it's not going to disrupt the momentum that the country naturally has. You have a lot of people in this country who do not want to emigrate, who are committed to South Africa, who want to make a difference. And I think, the message is stop relying on politicians. Start looking at your community, start looking at yourself, and start thinking about the ways you can contribute. It's as small a thing as, I went to that's ridiculous, as I went to the oral hygienist this afternoon. And she said to me, she works for the underprivileged for half a day, and half the day she spends working for the private practice. But she's kind of so, disillusioned with working for the poor because, the acknowledgement isn't there, etc. And I said to her, you know what? You're making a difference by working for that community, by flipping hell, pulling their teeth. You are making a difference in people's lives. And I think, if every South African just turned inwards and said, how can I make a difference? Let's ignore the noise. Let's ignore the politics. We've got a beautiful country, which we are committed to, and we want it to work. Then I think, we're on the right trajectory, and you literally have to ignore the political noise above us and, make our own politics.
Love that. Thank you, Magda. Tony, what would your advice be?
Well, I think at one level we should make a noise, and we should never accept the fact that things are right when they're fundamentally wrong. That's, as Voltaire said, I mentioned, is a form of madness. So a lot of things are wrong, and we should demand that the government actually fulfills its basic duty. Never mind all these add-ons. They have a social contract with us, the citizens, that we'll give up some of our rights and freedoms in order that they protect us. Well, as we saw in July, they don't protect us, and we hire private security, those who can afford it, and the rest are at the mercy of events. So that's the reality. But on the inspirational side, I absolutely agree. George H.W. Bush, when he was president of the United States, the 41st, spoke about 1,000 points of light, and that to him was civil society in action. And we have, as Magda said, an incredible civil society, and it's very inspiring, and we must draw inspiration from it. We must add to the inspiration. One thing, we're talking about COVID, I'll just give you, this is very hardly heroic, the Leon family kitchen in Constantia, Cape Town. But, once or twice a week at the intense lockdown phase, we would make peanut butter sandwiches and deliver them to local Spar to help communities in need. Nothing, thousands were doing it here in the leafy suburb of the southern suburbs of Cape Town. And what is amazing that, as these trolleys would fill up, and then there'd be another call, and then more sandwiches would arrive. And these were small gestures with big impact. And I'm not saying charity is a substitute for work, but there is so much of that about those 1,000 points of light, and we need to illuminate the country with them. And the third thing, if I might offer this, nothing is permanent. Well, I mean, Magda, came out of a communist system and then into apartheid South Africa, and both have disappeared, more or less at the same time, incidentally, and they seemed immovable. And so we have lived history here. But, can I leave you with one story? It's entirely true. In the fag end of the tricameral parliament, this is in 1993, the Minister of Posts and Telecommunications, Dr. Velgemoot, came to give a presentation. I attended a portfolio committee, or whatever it was called back then, about the introduction of cell phones in South Africa, which came in 1994. And the government had a scenario, best case, worst case. And on there was cell phones had never arrived here, because no one knew what was going to happen. And they said, well, the likely take-up of cell phones would be 500,000 users. And in a best case scenario, it'd be 900,000. Well, they're more than 20 million smartphones in South Africa at the moment. Smartphones and cell phones, they're two for every family, as far as I can tell. So it's warp speed. Things just speed up exponentially. You don't know. and anything is possible. And onto those possibilities, we can be optimistic because nothing stays the same.
Yeah, I love that. I remember some of those predictions in the beginning. They were really quite humorous. I'm interested, will you actually watch, Bonang, are you going to watch tomorrow night?
Yes, I'm going to watch tomorrow night. I was invited to be there in person, but I'm still petrified of the Omicron variant. I think that the general message to all of us should be, of course, we need to have hope based on pragmatism. At the moment, the president gets to his 6th State of the Nation address, with South Africa holding world records for all the wrong reasons. The most unequal society in the world, highest unemployment in the world, highest SME failure rate in the world, even suicide rate second only to Russia. Until and unless we address this, the ordinary people are witnessing us teetering towards being a failed state, where inequality is actually widening, racism is at an all-time high, Black graduates are roaming the streets hopelessly, public education has collapsed, public healthcare continue to fail the poor and the vulnerable. Crucial infrastructure is laying barren and not maintained, and lawlessness has become an epidemic.
You know, we can only hope that some of those deep issues are taken as seriously as you say them, Bonang. And I think you just need to look at some of the comments, how inspiring, just speaking the truth, and how people don't mind confronting what the truth is, as long as we have this mindset that we want to try and get through it and find practical solutions. So before we've been going for an hour 20, and we're incredibly grateful. For some reason, Howard got knocked off. I think he might be experiencing some power issues, so he apologizes, and he thanks you for all the time and the effort. And so we've been going for an hour 20 minutes, and before we log off, I'd be interested for you to speak, and you've given such inspirational messages the last bit, to speak a little bit of your state of the nation in terms of personally what you prepare to share with us, what you kind of trying to achieve this year, what are your big projects, and again, if you've got a final message as a final send-off to our viewers. Bonang, we're gonna kick off with you. So some of the big projects you're working on, be a bit, don't be too humble. We would like to really hear about them. And then a final message for our viewers, just to send them on a positive journey going forward.
So at the moment, absolutely determined to use the leverage of Business Unity South Africa as the apex organization to get us on the straight and narrow, speak truth to power, confront some of the evils that have lived in our dreams, and make sure that we hold these politicians finally accountable. For me, the message of hope is what I've been taught by this pandemic, that when the fisher women can't go out to sea for whatever reason, they repair their nets. What are we going to do to repair our nets as South Africans to make sure that when the world opens up, that we are globally competitive, that we can say to Ms. Tourist and Mr. Tourist, whatever you need, we have in abundance. Because a village that does not envelop its young, those young will burn it in order to feel its warmth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bonang, someone is asking, and they've asked a few times, just your view on the JSC kind of interview process. I'm sure it's a quick answer. What was your view on kind of that process?
So for the Chief Justice of the Apex Court, it is the President's prerogative. He chose this process of the Judicial Services Commission. Once you choose a process, it means you have got faith in the people that you've put in. They've made a recommendation. go ahead and implement it. You can't sit on the fence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Tony?
Well, personal goals is to lose some of the kilograms that the lockdown added to me by doing more exercise and not eating carbs. That's a personal goal for the next few months.
Do you know Mr. Noakes? Have you been spending time with Professor Noakes there?
Well, I know the drill. I've just got to actually, go from table to mouth or not, as the case might be. The second, is just to, I've done some big things. I suppose there were big things in politics, but I enjoy now doing things more on the micro level. I'm chairman of a company, a communications and advocacy company. It employs 9 people. Got some great people working for us, young talent, all races, and including a Zimbabwean, I'm very proud to mention. And, they really, and just to help mentor those folk and mentor some other people who are more in the public space, I really enjoy that. I get a kick out of that. I do, now that, Tony Benn said when he left politics after 50 years in the House of Commons, I've resigned from Parliament in order to spend more time with politics. And I found it actually quite liberating that I don't have to go representing the DA view, that I can be my own person, write my truth, and, share my thoughts to the extent that anyone's interested in having them shared with, they seem to. And, I just think that I'm 65 years old. God, it's very old, older than anyone else on this foursome. I'd like Magda's face cream, but that's not going to help. But I must tell you that, I was reading an article.
Definitely wouldn't like my hair, that's for sure.
Yeah, I didn't have my father's hair gene, happily. But the thing is that, between 60 and 70, and I'm in the midpoint of that, you can have the most productive and profound life. And they call it the third age or some mumbo jumbo. But I'm really enjoying that fact. Also, I'm younger than the president. So that also gives me some succor. And I don't have his problems to deal with. So, yeah, and I enjoy the fact that we live on the southern tip of Africa with all its challenges, frustrations, madnesses. But we still have a great country, and we must preserve it and make it work.
The final word from our indomitable Magda, who's been such an inspiration to so many people. And, we've really seen the kind of fight that you've put in for the fight against corruption, and your business achievements have been something quite astounding. And I'm sure you've got a message of hope and a message of energy for South African we've heard a lot of the noise here. And so over to you, Magda, just to close it off.
Okay, so let's bring it down to a micro level of basically saying, I'm on a bit of a personal journey. And that was, a couple of years ago, and, I set up together with a partner, we set up a venture capital business in the UK. And, the learning journey is the exposure I'm getting to what is happening in the broader world. And there is, a lot happening. So the world is changing at an exponential pace. The pace of innovation, the amount of money that innovation is attracting, and that's innovation in every single sphere, from healthcare and therapeutics to artificial intelligence, quantum computing, to renewable energy. The world is changing, and living at the tip of Africa, we are not aware. We live in a bit of a bubble, and we are just not aware of what's happening in the broader world and how quickly the world is changing. So, what I'm doing is I'm learning, and obviously investing in these startup companies and living, through, vicariously through the dreams of much younger generation than me starting businesses, and hopefully, sharing some of the experiences I have had. But at the same time, the learning journey has an objective, and that is that, while I'm learning, I am hoping that I can then bring some of those trends and some of those innovations and some of the breakthroughs back to South Africa. And, even if it takes, one of the companies we invested in is working on fusion as a source of energy. Now, if they crack fusion, or any one company in the world cracks fusion, then we've got free, clean supply of energy for the entire planet for years, for generations to come. So those are my lessons, and I'm hoping to expose South Africans to more of what's happening on that innovation front in the world. And to hopefully, through that exposure, kind of give people hope. So that's my personal journey at the moment. I'm a student.
Fantastic. I'm getting a lot of questions. Just to remind everyone about the names of your books, Bonang, please just remind us of the different books names.
Lift as you rise, and Behold the Turtle.
Yeah. And Tony?
Well, I've got 5, but I'll just mention the latest one. It's called Future Tense, Reflections on My Troubled Land.
And Magda?
Okay, that's all very sophisticated. I've only written 1 book and it took me 2 weeks. And it's only coming out in May. And it is simply called Magda.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I think one of the great beauties of South Africa is that, people like yourselves who make the kind of time that you do just to speak to all of us and just to provide your insight and your inspiration. And to do that is such a profound gift that we have in South Africa, that we can all speak like this. And I've seen the comments on the various platforms. You really, just by speaking openly and speaking honestly, you all have provided such inspiration. And I can't thank you enough. On behalf of the Jewish Report, and behalf of all our viewers, I just really appreciate all your time. Bonang, Tony, Magda, thank you so much. And just a final word, it's interesting, my daughter's on the SRC, she was on the ANC slate at Wits. And it's very interesting because when young people speak, they speak with a certain hope and optimism. And the biggest thing I notice is that they drive out any cynicism. And I think that that's an amazing thing that each one of you have got as part of your DNA, that even though you understand deeply the problems, the cynicism isn't there. And that's enormously inspiring and optimistic. And just thank you so much. And just
sorry, I've got it. My other project this year is to convert your daughter to a better party. That's
maybe, I'll leave that with you, Tony. So thank you so much, and just thank you for your time. And please God, tomorrow we see a courageous and bold president who is the man we all hope him to be. So thank you so much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
All the best. Thank you.
Bye.